Books, books. I like books. I'm gonna read them all.
Hi readers, Chris here. Welcome to my channel where I review fantasy, Stephen King, all sorts of books, and today I'm going to be talking about Alice by Christina Henry. This is my first Christina Henry book, and I've heard a lot of good things about her, about being like fantasy / horror, and those are kind of two of my favorite genres, so this is the first one I'd ever read, and I was putting it off until finally my friend Bad over at Bad is Rad, she finally convinced me to read this one, and yeah, this was an interesting book. So I'm going to tell you what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and hopefully help you decide if you should read Alice or not. So as the name suggests, Alice is a retelling of the classic Alice in Wonderland type story. Except in this book, Alice is a young girl who is basically in an asylum in a mental institute. And we don't really know exactly why she's there in the beginning, just that something very traumatic happened to her and her family kind of sent her there. Now, in this asylum, she has a friend, a fellow inmate that she kind of talks to through the walls, who she's not sure how crazy he is or not, because this guy keeps talking about the Jabberwock, that the Jabberwock is after him and that, like, they're gonna have to fight this evil creature. So something ends up happening in the beginning of the book where Alice and her fellow inmate basically kind of find themselves on the run through this city. Alice is trying to find the Vorpal sword that she can use to defeat the Jabberwocky, and they're going through this city. I think it's called Old City. And Old City is like basically a terrible place. It is full of all these like underground clubs that are run by different characters, the rabbit, the caterpillar, the Cheshire cat, and not a great place, especially for a young woman, but Alice is on a journey to find the Vorpal sword, defeat the Jabberwock, and then finally stand off against the rabbit who has terrorized her in the past. I went into this book with like no expectations other than like I had heard good things, so I was kind of excited about it. And again, I had heard that it was a mixture of fantasy and horror, but I had no idea how dark this book was going to get. Like, this book puts the dark in dark fantasy. It is really dark. And I should mention up front that there are definitely trigger warnings going into this book. So if you are someone that is triggered by violence against women, and especially sexual violence, like, definitely trigger warning, because there is a lot of it, like way more than I expected. Also, a trigger warning for trafficking, because as I mentioned, while Alice is kind of going through the city and visiting all of these characters like basically kidnap and brutalize young women, which I'm not triggered by that, but it wasn't exactly the most pleasant reading experience, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not triggered by it, but also, like, it got pretty hardcore to me at parts. I'm sure other people think it's not. Like, it's not graphic. Like, it's not graphic, I should say that. It's not graphic, but you have a very clear understanding of what is going on, of what is happening to these girls and how they're being tortured at times. So again, not exactly a fun reading experience. So I don't know whether to put that in the like or not like camp. It's more of just a general observation. So what I liked about this story is I liked the setup. I liked the setup of Alice being this young girl in an asylum, but she doesn't really belong there because she's not crazy. She's not mental. It's just something traumatic happened to her, and this is something that you can see throughout history. Women that are quote-unquote hysterical end up getting put in places that they don't belong because no one knew how to deal with them appropriately. So I liked that part, and I do think Alice, as a young girl, does a good job being a strong character and dealing with all these really horrible things. Like, she doesn't crack, she doesn't break down, she keeps going, like she never gives up on her goal, and I think that's really admirable, so I liked that. What I didn't like is that I feel like some of the violence against young women was very repetitive. So like I mentioned, Alice goes to visit the Cheshire Cat, she goes to visit the caterpillar, she goes to visit the walrus, the rabbit. All of these characters that are male characters are all terrorizing women. Now they're all doing it in like slightly different ways. Like some are more on the violent side, some are more on like the sexual type side, but all of them are terrorizing women. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, can't we have someone that terrorizes young boys too, just to even it out a little bit? So I felt like by the time she got to the last one, it kind of felt a bit repetitive and the shock value had kind of worn off by that point. It didn't feel shocking to me anymore because this had already happened in the book. At least that's just the way that I felt. The other thing I did like about this book is Alice's sidekick, Hatcher, the other guy from the asylum. Again, we don't know very much about him in the beginning, and he's very mysterious because we're like, how did he end up in the asylum? We start to hear that he has a pretty shady past and he's done some horrible things, but has he really done those things, or was it a case of he was in the wrong place at the wrong time? We don't really know. As the story goes along, we find out that something traumatic happened to someone in his family. And I don't want to give away any spoilers here, so let's just say that something traumatic happened to someone in his family, and that's really what drives him. It's what drives him to want to help Alice. It's what drives him to want to defeat the Jabberwocky. It's what drives him. And I think that makes him a really interesting character because on one hand, you feel bad for him because he really wants to help his family member, but on the other side, he's done some really bad things. So I love a morally gray character, and I think that Hatcher is a great one. The other thing I wasn't a big fan of about this book is probably the ending. Again, this is a story that is kind of leading up to this big, like, face-off. Alice has been searching for the rabbit, she's searching for the Vorpal sword, she's going to defeat the Jabberwocky, and if you've ever seen any of the Alice in Wonderland movies, you kind of have that big battle scene where you have the sword and the monster and the girl, and it's really cool. But I feel like the confrontation that happens at the end of the book is over like that. It ends very, very quickly. The confrontation ends quickly. And I found that not satisfying. I was not satisfied. I was expecting some more, I don't know what, some more oomph. I was expecting some of the characters to maybe get a comeuppance, maybe Alice could have said some really powerful words and put these monsters in their place. I don't know. I was just expecting something more, and I feel like the confrontation ended in like 2 pages. It was too quick, and then it was over. So where does that leave me? Because there's 2 things that I mentioned that I liked, and then there were 2 things that I mentioned that I didn't like. So that kind of leaves me middle of the road. I am middle of the road on this book. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. There's parts of it that I liked, but there's parts of it that I didn't like. So ultimately, this one is just okay for me. It's just okay. I would say that it's good enough to try out another Christina Henry book, but it's not good enough to want to read any more books in this series because there is a sequel to Alice. I forget what it's called. There are more books in this particular series. I don't know if I'm interested in reading those, but I would try out another Christina Henry book. So hopefully me saying that will give you a better idea on whether you should try this one or not. So that is it from me today. And yes, before anyone asks, I am wearing a wrist brace because I'm old now and my carpal tunnel was acting up. But now I want to know from you, have you read Alice? Have you read anything else by Christina Henry? If you have, let me know if you have a favorite book of hers. Maybe I'll try that one next. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish stuff coming your way soon. All right, everyone, happy reading.